thanks for coming tonight. For those of you who are not here this afternoon or this morning, my name is Tim Thomas. I'm on the board of directors of the JACL, the curator of the little museum we have downstairs. If you haven't seen it, I hope you come tomorrow and see our museum. So this weekend has been pretty amazing, actually. We really are very pleased with the people who have come. I think we've had a really good program. For those of you, so you know that this Abalone Festival is the beginning of a series of programs we're planning for the 100th anniversary of this very building that we're in. It opened on May 2nd, 1926. Actually built in 2 months, this building. It was built by an organization called the Japanese Association. This neighborhood was once a thriving Japan town. And they built this building because they felt it needed a place where people could come and sort of sort out their grievances with their neighbors, where newly arriving Japanese immigrants could come and sort of assimilate themselves into the community. And they would bring artists, musicians, and theater from Japan. They had kabuki theater here. They even had sumo wrestling in here at one time. All kinds of things going on in this very building right here. Which makes this building unique in a lot of ways is this building has been in the hands of the Japanese community since the day it was built, which is very unusual. So we're really honored to have this building. I'm really honored to be part of this building. And as I mentioned earlier today, the reason we're having the Abalone Festival, besides the fact that I've been researching the Abalone story for 20-some odd years, but it was abalone that brought the Japanese to Monterey, and it was abalone money that built this building that we're all sitting in today. So that's why we're here. So thank you. I know that I'm going to turn it over to Elisa, right, of the White Abalone Project, and then we're going to go from there.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks so much for inviting us. We really appreciate it, and we're learning a lot, especially about Roy, which is really special. So I'm the director of the White Abalone Captive Breeding Program, which is based at the Bodega Marine Lab. So this is a map of the different species, which we saw a different version of earlier in the day if you were here. And white abalone are that gray line, which range from Point Conception south. And so you might be asking, kind of, why are we talking about white abalone in Monterey? There's a couple of connections. Obviously, the one that we've heard a little bit about and we're going to hear more about is that the person who discovered white abalone was Roy Hattori, who is from Monterey Bay. And also, we have partners throughout the state, including in Moss Landing, who are helping us raise white abalone for restoration aquaculture. Usually I spend a lot more time on the ecological, economic, and cultural importance of abalone, but we've heard about that all day, and I can't do the justice that everybody else did in their talk, so I'm just going to reiterate that white abalone and all abalone have really immense cultural, economic, and ecological importance. So we know that all abalone declined in the 1900s. This is a graph of commercial landings, but white abalone were hit particularly hard. We lost over 99% of the species in a decade, and that was because of overharvest and us not really understanding the ecology of the species, so the management also kind of wasn't there. We had less than 1% of the species left. The animals were listed as critically endangered because abalone have to be pretty close together to reproduce in the wild. And with so few animals, they were too far apart for eggs and sperm to meet and for there to be any kind of wild reproduction. So our program, the White Abalone Captive Breeding Program, in 2017, white abalone were collected from Catalina Island and brought into captivity with the goal of spawning those animals in captivity and putting their babies out in the wild to save the species. The species was listed as endangered on the Endangered Species Act in 2001, and there was a first successful spawn in the program at the Channel Islands Marine Research Institute. And at the time, it was like, great, we're going to save the species. There was another spawn in 2003, and then a disease called withering syndrome happened and eliminated a lot of the animals that were in, the majority of the animals that were in the land-based restoration aquaculture program. This is a photo, or photos of red abalone, healthy red abalone. This is the foot at the top, and then you can see it at the bottom, and it's like totally shriveled and withered. That's what withering syndrome looked like. And then for almost a decade, there were no successful spawning attempts for white abalone, so they just weren't able to be bred in captivity anymore. The program moved to the Bodega Marine Lab in 2011, and then the first successful white abalone spawn in nearly a decade happened in 2012, thanks to this wonderful human over here, who we're gonna see soon in a movie. And we still have one of those animals. So since then yeah, sure, why not? I guess I put that in this order. So this is what spawning, this is what spawning looks like in a white abalone. Go ahead. And what we do is we put the animals in buckets, like Art talked about earlier. We do very similar methods as with red abalone. This is the female kind of crunching down and expelling a bunch of eggs. The most that we've had is about 20 million eggs from a female, but that's really, really rare. That's only happened once. But they can spawn several million eggs in a single spawning event. And for a long time, figuring out how to get them to spawn was really challenging. They weren't as predictable as red abalone are, but because of the research that we've been doing at Bodega Marine Lab, we've become a lot more reliable in getting our animals to spawn. So this is a video of what happens with those animals when they're older. So this is what our day-to-day life looks like in the Marine Lab, pretty much. Go ahead, you can play the video. This is one of our former technicians, Leela, feeding a bunch of our cultured red algae to our troughs of white abalone. So we saw pictures earlier of the cultured abalone farm in Goleta, and our systems are kind of designed after what they do, which is flow through seawater. And so those are some of our like medium-sized animals that are growing out in the lab. And then here is one of our newly settled babies. So this is an animal that was settled on the surface for 8 hours. Art talked about earlier how they're in a larval stage, which I'll show you in a second, for about a week. And then they toddle around. They're so cute when they first settle onto the bottom. This is when they're still swimming. This is what we do for 7 days after we spawn these animals. We look at them every day under the microscope, observe to make sure they're developing normally, behaving normally. This is one of my favorite things to see. So this is our larvae when they're just getting ready to settle, which Art also talked about earlier, when they start to get what we call sticky. So they go from that swimming phase to starting to test the surface, and that's kind of our indicator that they're ready to settle on the substrate and become a crawling abalone. I'm sorry, I don't know why that's in there twice. Just skip it. Okay, so the production of those animals from our initial spawning attempt in 2012 has increased every year with a decline because of COVID. And so we went from producing a small handful of animals to producing tens of thousands of animals every year. And we're continuing to bring those numbers back up. We've already increased the production by an order of magnitude, and we'll have to do that at least one more time before we kind of meet the captive production goals needed to restore the species. And restoration has kind of a two-pronged approach. The first is spawning animals in captivity and raising them so that they can then go out into the ocean, which is the second piece of the puzzle. And this is what our partners in Southern California do in the native range for abalone, which is putting them out into the wild, or what we call outplanting. And this work takes a huge network of partners. So these are just the partners that house white abalone and help grow them out, including the cultured abalone farm, which you saw a photo for, with the exception of one of our local partners, the Monterey Abalone Company. They don't house our animals, but they are responsible for almost all of their food right now. So we're really grateful for that local partnership. And then we have a lot of animals grown locally here at Abalone Marine Labs too, which is really exciting. So saving the species, we've outplanted over 17,000 white abalone that have been produced in the program. But saving the species requires a new format for support. So historically, the work that we've done has been funded basically for the last decade entirely by federal funding. And as of July 1st, we no longer have that funding, which covers kind of the basic needs of our program. That's part of why we have a silent auction going around. We've had a local foundation step up to help us fill this gap while we figure out what the model for restoration aquaculture looks like in this kind of new world. Part of that is they challenge us to raise some of that money in a match. So we're looking for more support. Sorry, can you go back? The take-homes of this are that abalone are culturally, economically, and ecologically important, and although they were pushed to the brink, the captive production, outplanting, and research work that we and all of our partners are doing are helping to save the species. And then the knowledge and resources that we're using, because of our vast network of partnerships, can inform sustainable aquaculture and fisheries practice. And that we're entering this new and uncertain era of what restoration looks like in terms of how we do funding and how we support this work locally and nationally. And lastly, I just wanted to show this photo of Nora, who's sitting here with my son when he was 2, meeting an abalone for the first time. And I'd like to tell the story that the first time I got to go on an outplanting cruise and see white abalone going out into the ocean was also the first time that I sent him to preschool. And so it was kind of a monumental week in my life. And just that when we save a species, we secure a brighter world for us and the next generation. And then I just want to give a quick overview of the night, which is actually I'm going to make a bunch of adjustments too. So one, we started 10 minutes late. So we're going to push everything back a few minutes. We're also going to leave the silent auction go through the first few hours of the programming tomorrow. And so we're going to leave some stuff up, or we'll move it around if we need to get things out of the way. But we'll let that keep running tomorrow, just so that other folks who are here during the day programming also have a chance. Tim is going to present next on Roy Hattori and his discovery of white abalone, which we're all really excited about. Then we'll take a quick break and then screen an exclusive sneak peek of the abalone mother. And then we'll have a panel discussion between myself, star of that film, Kristen Aquilino, and Luke Gardner, who will be here really soon and is one of our partners who grows white abalone for us here at Abalone Marine Labs. And then we'll do a quick panel discussion and then an informal Q&A kind of mingling around the room. Thank you so much. I'm going to quickly hand this over to Tim so that he can talk to us about Roy Hattori.
Thank you. So a couple of things. I need to apologize. This is a program I put together a couple of years ago, when, believe it or not, the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary actually gave me an award. Part of the award, I had to actually do a lecture. And this is the lecture that I gave. It was actually, the award was the Ed Ricketts Memorial Award, so I called it What's Up, Doc? When History and Science collide, right? And of course, I love this postcard, Monterey, 1935, and they all play at the beach. And I always thought that lady in the middle there had a big head of lettuce on the beach. But I guess she got it. I hope this does what it's supposed to do. At first, how I got here. So, these are the scientists in California Department of Fish and Game in 1929, 1930. When I first started doing this work, one of the first things I came across were all the old fishing game publications. I found those to be incredibly useful. They're all written contemporary of the time. They worked with the fishing community. In those days, fishing game in those days was a whole different kind of programming. They really worked to help the fishermen. That's what they were doing, and as opposed to today, it's a little bit different. These are the scientists who were doing a lot of that work. There's one is Francis Clark, there's W.L. Schofield, M.J. Croker, Richard Linder, and the guy in the end is a guy named J.B. Phillips. By the way, Francis Clark, maybe the name some of you are aware of, Francis Clark was way ahead of her time. She was the first person within fishing game to receive a PhD, which she got in 1925. So they weren't sure what to do with her. So they said, let's make her the librarian. Well, she took a series of books that sat on a man's desk and built it one of the premier fisheries libraries in the world. It's actually now here in the Monterey area. But she went on to all different programs for California fishing game, in particular the sardine program. She did all that. But Julie Phillips was actually stationed in Monterey. He was hired by another college to come down. In fact, I've seen the letter offering the jobs. The sardine cans are opening soon, you need to get to Monterey. And they were stationed at Hopkins Marine Station at that time. And his job was to go into the canneries every morning and meet the fishermen. And they would keep records of how much fish they caught, where they're catching them, that kind of thing. And this is my favorite part. They would take samples of the sardines back to Hopkins where he would weigh them and sex them. And then they'd bring them back to the canneries so they wouldn't lose any fish. All right. So what's up, Doc? So here's the famous Doc Ricketts here, of course. This is J.B. Phillips right here, both the Humboldt squid you see right there. So there's always been sort of a question, when did Ed Ricketts become Doc Ricketts? Was it when John Steinbeck called him that in the book, Cannery Row? No, but I found that every scientist who was ever on Cannery Row was referred to as Doc. All the workers call these guys Doc. So, and of course, you know the story of Ed Ricketts. Ed Ricketts was essentially a self-taught marine biologist. He was a brilliant, brilliant guy. Julie Phillips also didn't have a PhD, but he also referred to as Doc on Cannery. He didn't like it very much, but they still referred to him as that. So Julie was famous for rock fishes. That's what he did. He was very famous for rock fishes in California. This is, I've been told, what was one of the premier books ever written about rockfishes. This is his, came out in 1957. They even named a rockfish after Julie Phillips. There he is right there. Yeah. But there's my friend Roy. So those of you who were earlier this morning, I talked a lot about Roy. I knew Roy for close to 30 years. He was a true hero of mine. And this is him as a young man. He was 18 when his picture was taken, going out, getting ready to go diving. The wool underwear that he's wearing was product, was the stuff that came from Japan. There was a company in Tokyo that's still there, by the way, that was producing this wool underwear strictly for the divers here in Japan. I mean, Monterey Bay is not known for its warmth. And so they would wear this, sometimes 2 pairs of that, put on their clothes, put on a big heavy canvas suit, attach about 65 pounds of the lead weight to the front back, tie lead to their shoes, bolt on the helmet, and go down into the Monterey Bay. And they'd be down pretty much all day collecting abalone. But what's Roy is important for a number of reasons, but one of the reasons is that Roy was the only diver, Japanese diver, that was born here. So he was Nisei, second generation. All the other divers came to Japan, and with a couple exceptions, returned to Japan because they're all working on contract. And by the way, a diver's life like this, as a diver, is really about 10 years. It's really hard on your body to do that kind of work. So this is typical gear. I don't want to go through a whole lot of this, but you can see all the typical gear here. There's a dive suit. So here's the dive suit, weights, lifeline, helmet. This is the collar that sits on the shoulder. They screw the helmet onto. The helmet weighs about 35 pounds. The lid bag they use to put the abalone in. They take 2 of them down there when they go into the water. And all that gear came from Japan. They did not like the American gear. Roy told me it was just too rough. And he liked putting on the Japanese gear, so it was like putting silk on. And so here he is ready to go diving, right there. That's his brother and cousin, right there. And he just get going down the ladder and going to the boy. So in this picture you can see there's the hose here and the lifeline here. So we had two lines. We had a lifeline, so there should come probably a tug on that lifeline. But we also had, and there was a signal, a tug you would pull when the abalone basket had been filled, so you had to pull the basket up, and then they would send another one down. Also, in this photograph, you can see the toolbox, like the Japanese fishing tackle box right there. And then here he is, handsome young man that he was, going down the ladder into the Monterey Bay. That's descending the ladder. I like these pictures. It's like going on vacation. Here we are, going up the car. Right? And there he is going into the water. And these guys would go down 30, 40, 50 feet. The deeper you went, of course you couldn't stay that long, deeper they went. And some of these guys would go as deep as 100 feet into the Monterey Bay. I mean, 100 feet, I know there are divers here. At that level, you can't see anything at 100 feet. And they're on their hands and knees trying to find abalone. And then they have to work their way up very, very slowly to a 30-foot level where they be down there all day collecting abalone. And this is one of my favorite pictures in the water. You can see here's the brother, her cousin, and this gentleman here, on the sculling oar, which only the Japanese boats had the sculling oar. Of course, that came from Japan. They didn't have to use a motor. They just tracked the diver by the bubbles in the water, and he would move the boat with the scull. Now, I've been to Japan a number of times, and I had the opportunity to work with a boat with a skull on it. And I tell you, it's really hard. But once you get the hand of it, it's just with your wrist. That's all you do. You can actually move that boat. It's pretty cool how they do that. But my favorite thing in this picture is this. So this is the cover for the engine. There is an engine on this boat. So they're going back to the mother boat. But on the cover, you can see there's a tea kettle here, which always kept water. So when you got out of water, they'd have hot tea. And then, of course, he kept his shoes here because he would be so cold that he would have hot shoes to put on his feet. Right? Up, finish the dive. So the boats come in after 3 days of diving. This is the mother boat here. And by the way, the abalone season can be very long. It would change from each season to season, but it can be up to 9 months sometimes. These guys go for 3 days at a time, come back and there were nine different Japanese companies operating off the Monterey Wharf in the 1930s. Each boat would come back with about 200 dozen large red abalone, and they kept them in these boxes called live boxes, which is technology from Japan. The boxes were made here in Monterey, though, by the Monterey Boat Works out of redwood, and they would keep the abalone fresh in these boxes while they're out for those 3 days. They float them in the water while they're out diving. And bring it back into Monterey. And here you can see the boats coming in. This all the abalone on the boat right here, and they load into these boxes here. This is right at the Monterey Wharf. We're going to bring them right up into the canneries, exactly right there. There they are loading up. Into the canneries here. These wonderful pictures. This is all by the way, these photographs were all taken by J.D. Phillips. So when I first started doing this kind of work, and I was working at the Maritime Museum, I got a phone call from a guy named Don Phillips. And it turns out Don Phillips was the son of J.D. Phillips. And his dad had passed away a few years before that. He said, Jim, we're cleaning out the house. And we found this old box of pictures. Would you like to have them? So I got down there, and there's this file box of 500, at least 500 photographs, negatives, and on the back of each photograph is who, when, where, and why. It is the most important photographic collection of Monterey fisheries in the 1920s and 30s to exist. We've ever things that we thought we would never see. I mean, things like this were just very unusual. So he chronicled everything that was out there. So that collection, by the way, now lives in the Monterey Library, so we can all see it. So the workers, and there were there were at least 3 different abalone processors on the wharf, some larger ones, and all the workers in these canneries were all Japanese for the most part. You see the ladies are pulling the abalone out of the shell, and here they are cleaning them in the cannery, pounding the abalone, which is of course something they learned from the German restaurateur named Papa Risotto, who invented the abalone steak at his Monterey restaurant in 1908, where he treated it like Wiener Schnitzel and made abalone famous. And by the way, Roy told me that because Roy's mother had her own cannery, and he said his mother would bring in these old Sicilian guys to pound the tough steaks. So, of course, they're all on the popularness. The abalone came to his restaurant right there, which is right at the foot of the Monterey War. So here's Roy right here. So he was about 19 when this photograph was taken. And these guys go long distance, stay in Monterey Bay. They'll go down to Santa Barbara, be gone for 2 weeks at a time, caught the abalone. So in September 15th, 1939, he was diving in about 60 feet of water off Point Conception, and he came across an unusual looking abalone. He thought to himself, this might be a new species. He'd never seen them before. So he gathered them and took them onto a boat, and he spent the next 2 weeks looking for more of them. He did find a couple more. He actually got about 15 of them in total. And then he brought them back to Monterey. We took them over to a guy named Andrew Sorensen, who was actually an insurance salesman, but he also was an amateur collector of marine mollusks, and was considered to be the local expert. And Roy would dive for him from time to time and collect shells for him. So I brought him over to Mr. Sorensen, and Sorensen looked at it and goes, well, I don't know what those are. Those are unusual. I've never seen that before. So, together, and then there's a white abalone, that's the abalone that we found. Together they took them over to Hopkins Marine Station, where they met with this Dr. Harold Heath right here. He looked at it and said, I don't know what that is either. They were just not sure. So, Sorensen writes a letter and sends one of the shells to Washington, D.C. to his friend Dr. Paul Bardish, who was then the director of the Natural History Museum at the Smithsonian. And he was considered to be the world-leading expert in marine mollusks. And this is the letter that he wrote along with those shells. And down there he said, it was a commercial diver, friend of mine, who brought out these unusual specimens. That's Dr. Paul Bardish right there. And so Bardish wrote this letter back to Sorensen. He said, it is more than likely that this will prove, as you surmise, a new species. If this is the case, I shall take the pleasure in naming it for you. Now we all know, at least we all learned that if you were the discoverer of a new species, that they're going to name it after the person who discovered it. But no, he didn't name it after Roy. He named it after Andrew Sorensen. So that actually is the actual shell that they sent to the Smithsonian in 1939. It's still in their collection. I actually tried to borrow one, so they kind of laughed at me. They didn't get it, I guess. But anyway, doesn't matter. So that's the actual shell that they did. And then Bardish kind of lived on this. He actually presented at a conference of the new species of the white abalone. You can see it up here at the top. Up here he's talking about. And then new species. But when Roy was diving at that same dive where he found the white abalone, he also found some unusual new red abalone. And they did, in turn, name the subspecies of the red abalone after Roy right there. But the subspecies, that's kind of like the minor leagues, right? I mean, that's not the big league. You know, it's kind of like when I was a kid, we watched game shows on TV, and if you lost on the game show, they gave you a box of turtle wax. Yeah, they named that one after Roy. He was never very happy about it. He was always upset they didn't name that white abalone after Roy. And so a number of us, besides myself, there are other historians who looked into the story, including Roy's own grandson, Tommy Hattori. And all we had, of course, was Roy telling us, you know, I found this white abalone, and then about 2 years ago, I had this idea. I get them from time to time. I would contact the Smithsonian Natural History Museum and see if they still had the actual correspondence that went back and forth between Sorensen and Bardish. And sure enough, they did. And it took them about 6 months to send them to me. But when they did, we were able to find this. This is the actual letter from Andrew Sorensen, dated June 28, I think it is 1940, after it was named after Sorensen. Even Sorensen wasn't very happy about it. He says, but it was Roy Hattori who put out those original large shells. So there it is in black and white from the guy that was Roy who found the big white abalone right there. So we said, aha! And so when I had discovered that having a species name change is almost impossible, I contacted this organization. They're actually based in Europe, and the guy again just kind of laughed at me. But the good thing is that everybody knows about it now, and I'm honored about that. So you got that. So we got to save the white abalone. That's why we're here right today. So all for saving the white abalone. So there's Roy, and there's Roy as well. That's a great thing. It's near Old Pacific Road along the Silmar, the old NOAA building, the NOAA Fisheries building. It's in a lot of controversy right now. There's some plans to possibly tear it down. I know folks are trying to say that in the 2000s, NOAA Fisheries had that building, and they contracted a very well-known artist named Ray Scholl, who lives in Alaska, who's very well known in the marine science world, to paint a mural around the building. And when he did that, I was the curator of the Maritime Museum at that time. When he came to the museum, he wanted to have a nice exhibit about Roy and Monterey Abalone, and so intrigued with that he added Roy in the face of the diver in the water. So that was cool too. He did all that. But the murals are still on the building, and when they're trying to save that, because they can't, unfortunately, take the murals down. So if they destroy the building, they'll also destroy those murals there. So I thought, if you can't change the name, maybe we could just kind of add something to it. Like, my suggestion is that. I don't know. Why not? And there's Roy, a few years before he passed away. And I know I bored you guys, so thank you very much.
So we're going to embark on, I don't think that's the right word, but whatever, an exclusive sneak peek of a movie called The Abalone Mother. I'm just going to ask that we don't record this, as it's not maybe in its final release form yet. And please know that you are the first audience who gets to see it, and this is a really, really special thing. Thank you all. I'd like to invite up Dr. Kristen Aquilino, who, as you saw, was the founding director of the White Abalone Captive Breeding Program. And so she built everything that I get to do every day, which is pretty fantastic for me. And Dr. Luke Gardner, who is at Moss Landing Marine Labs. Both of them, well, Luke is a Sea Grant Extension specialist. Kristen used to be a Sea Grant Extension specialist. Kristen also is now the Associate Director of the Bodega Marine Lab, where this program is based. And yeah, the three of us are gonna talk about some things together. Come on up. And we'll have time also for questions for folks kind of individually with the panel. But take advantage of this time to talk to some key people during White Abalone restoration. Okay, so this feels so silly after the film because the film's so powerful, but what's the hardest part of the work to save a species?
I think, as I said in the film, I think something that's really hard about studying the planet right now is the planet is changing really rapidly. And it's often changing at a pace that's not only hard to do something about, but it's even hard to understand it's changing so fast. in several spaces. And as I mentioned in the film as well, I feel so lucky to have been working in this space of renewal and hope. But it's also surrounded by a lot of this concern that's hard to process with the time span that we have on this earth as people. And so wrapping my head around that and trying to be productive in this space in some ways without losing hope is probably the hardest thing.
You know, it's something that Kristen said in the movie, not losing hope. Like, you guys have been doing it for a long time and not having any success. And then you finally did it and you got 20. 20 is, ostensibly not, gonna make a lick of difference, but it is a glimmer of hope and it's a crack in the door that then can be pushed open. I think the hardest thing about kind of saving a species, restoration of any description, particularly aquaculture, is the scale that's required. And so before you can get to the scale, you have to do the work that the Bodega Marine Lab and the White Abalone program has done. And, a credit to that organization is that they've done this work and the community just gets larger and larger. And so there's a lot of other organizations that have followed on from Bodega Marine Lab, including California Sea Grant and Moss Landing Marine Labs. And so, I remember we just got a call and it's like, you guys have had a really successful spawn and had way too many babies and nowhere to put them. And it's like, can you take them? And it's like, sure. And so that was, I think, in 2019. Yeah, and so we've been doing it ever since then. But I'd say the scale, the ocean is a really, really big place. We are somewhat fortunate in that abalone, they don't move a lot. So it's good in that regard. If you do put them in a place, you can conceivably think that they will be next to each other and continue to kind of like spawn and procreate. But generally the scale is enormous, and that's where a lot of my work kind of works around is using kind of aquaculture and taking commercial aquaculture infrastructure and technology and trying and applying it to restoration purposes.
I want to add one more hard thing which came at the end of this film and actually didn't occur until after this was filmed, which is it really takes a lot of consistent support in order to do something like this. As Alyssa showed us, there are a dozen partners involved in this work. Luke is one of them through a California Sea Grant and Moss Landing Marine Lab. But it takes a village. I have a couple of children. I can't raise them, just me and my spouse. Bodega Marine Lab alone can't do this work, and no one can do this work without consistent support. This us being here is being part of this community of people who care about abalone, but it's also a call for help, not just for the species, but it is hard to be in a space where it's particularly in this moment where there is not that consistent support.
Just to add to that, like this year in particular, early in the year, some of the things that we got to say in our program was like, we've done it. We're doing this really reliably. Like, we've gotten to a point where it wasn't so much about discovering how to do it, but getting it done. And at the same time, we kind of had the rug pulled out from under us in terms of the continued and necessary support for that. And one of those things is that Moss Landing over the last few years has spawned a bunch of animals really successfully, and we haven't had things like that happen, in the 10 years prior. So we're at this kind of turning point in terms of our abilities, and the support doesn't necessarily reflect that, which is kind of terrifying, because it's not that we've tried and tried and tried and we just can't do it. It's that we finally figured it out, and we might not be able to do it because there's no way to fund the work. So that's been the hardest part for me. What diverse communities do you engage? We talked a little bit about this, and we have at least two of our partners on the panel. Who do you engage with in your work, and how did you build those partnerships and collaborations?
Okay, so that's basically part of my job. Is California Sea Grant is extension. So if you're like a potato farmer and you're having a problem with your potatoes, you call your local extension agent. I do that for aquaculture. Aquaculture doesn't quite have the same industry size that things like agriculture does, so a lot of what I do is talking to people and developing kind of real, genuine relationships. It's not so transactional, but I'm looking for opportunities to help people. But in terms of the diversity, it's across the board. I talk to state and federal legislators about aquaculture. I talk to environmental NGOs about aquaculture. But most importantly, I talk to farmers or would-be farmers about what aquaculture is. I joke, probably talk more people out of aquaculture than into it. But that's part of my job, is to give them the harsh and sometimes ugly truth of aquaculture. It's still very much, if you want to make a small fortune in aquaculture, you start with a large one. But we work with lots of different people, and one thing that I find is having some success, not just in the White Abalone program, but restoration aquaculture generally, is aquaculture farmers, commercial aquaculture farmers, because what they have is expertise and scale and infrastructure, whereas that is often lacking in a lot of smaller, nascent kind of groups and organizations. And so that's one thing that the White Abalone program has been able to do, and that's work with the Cultured Abalone Farm, which is a farm down in near Santa Barbara there. And I think they are starting to produce significant numbers of white abalone by using this technology. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there for commercial aquaculture to play a hand in health restoration. Whereas once upon a time, a lot of environmental organizations were looking to aquaculture and trying to help it be more sustainable. And now I think commercial aquaculture can come back and help restoration activities.
I like that you went to aquaculture there. That's your job. I know that's where you're going to go with it. But it made me think about the changing relationships, as you mentioned, between aquaculture and science and restoration, but also with, Tim pointed out maybe that the relationship between fish and wildlife, or fish and game, and fishermen has changed through time. I think that there are a lot of these relationships that have evolved through time, and understanding that evolution and understanding where people are coming to at the table really matters. Understand that history, that's why we're here. What is the history of abalone and people? And I think that that's been really important in terms of building partnerships. I try to, through my science, I came at this from a very traditional scientific perspective, and so working with other scientists, with California Department of Fish and Wildlife, with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. But pretty quickly I learned that to save a species, it's a lot more than doing the science. It's about people. It is about saving us. And there's nothing more impactful to me in terms of the job I was doing when I had Alyssa's job than showing someone that an abalone has a face, it has eyes, and that makes it so people can connect to them. And I was just talking to Steve over here, who is a commercial abalone diver, and I think one of the stories that ebbs and flows through this is what is our culpability in this as human beings? We talk about overfishing having been really impactful for white abalone. What does that mean as human beings? So is that a flaw in us? Is that a problem with regulation or understanding of the ecology, or what is that? And then what is our responsibility when that happens? How do we interact with those things? And it's very much about who we are as human beings, and what connections can we find in this work in order to understand how to be humans on this planet and good stewards of this planet.
We talked a little bit in the beginning about the challenges and what's really hard right now, and there were some threads of what brings you hope. What brings you hope in this really challenging environment? People. People bring me hope. People are also the hardest. In this video that you just watched, I tell you a lot about myself. I might not tell you all of those things if I just saw you on the street corner, or I might. I'm a little bit of an open book. But this video for me, I think, really did connect a lot of dots for me about why I do the work that I do, and where we do find hope in this world,
which is in each other, there is a tremendous amount of loss in the aspect of living. It just is a part of life. And if we can find connection as we navigate that loss, then I think that's what makes us truly human. And that brings me a great deal of hope.
It's hard to follow. I'd be inclined to agree. I think, the more we talk with each other, the more we find out that we actually do have more in common than we have apart. And I think that's what's really important, that we do talk and we talk about these things and we think of ways to do it. But generally what gives me hope, or just a lot of satisfaction, is why I got into what I do, is just the intrinsic satisfaction of caring for something and seeing it grow. I get a lot of hope out of that, and I think we've come a long way with White Abalone, and then, like I said, just poking my head in there every now and then and seeing that the majority of them are a little bit bigger, which just gives me a lot of hope. So yeah, I look forward to looking after things and growing them. It's pretty simple.
Yeah, I think kind of the nature of the job is, well, when we're able to do the work that we're supposed to do, is pretty hopeful, because we're fostering a new generation of animals into the world every year, which is pretty amazing. And I think, it keeps me up at night that this program could end. And one of the things that gives me hope in that fear is that we've done so much work, and I want to give credit where it's due. Kristen did most of it, but in building this really big network of people throughout the state, and honestly throughout the world, through things like training events. Nora, one of my colleagues, led an entire workshop training people from 15 different facilities with the Cultured Abalone Farm, and so building this huge skill set, so that if things did go away for a little while, that we'd be able to pick it up, and it wouldn't be like it was in 2001, when there was nothing, the species almost went extinct. And then the other thing is that, we were given so many things for this auction that the people just came out for us. And as soon as we put the word out that we were in need of help, people really, they showed up. And I think, that part does feel really hopeful, that we can fall back into our community when we need to. Thank you all. Wendy?
Yeah, I have a naive question. What's the relationship between the restaurant industry, and I've had abalone twice in my long life, and what you're doing? With the restaurant industry, is that bad if the restaurant industry supported you?
Well, white abalone is an endangered species listed on the ESA. You can correct me if I'm wrong on this, there have been at least one instance of an endangered species being consumed, and that is salmon, right? I think there was on the East Coast.
It depends on. Yeah, so no, you can't eat white abalone, you'll get in a lot of trouble. Yes, there are stipulations that something can be endangered in a certain area and not endangered in another. It makes it very complicated to work out what you're allowed to eat and what you're not. So no, the restaurant industry don't affect it at all. Fisheries, it's been banned from fishing for
Since 1996.
a long time, but it's not bouncing back. So.
And just to clarify, you're eating red abalone.
Pardon me?
You're eating red abalone? No, I'm telling you that if you're eating red restaurants in California, well, I hope you are, eating red abalone. And that comes from now one of two aquaculture facilities for red abalone in the state, and we highly encourage people to, support those industries, because a lot of the knowledge that we have comes from them, but also we cannot produce white abalone at the scale that is needed for restoration without the physical space and expertise support of those commercial interests. And so by eating abalone, you are saving abalone.
That's a good
Yeah,
thing.
I mean, you could go one step further, and I think that would be very difficult to manage, but maybe one day in a far off distant future, there's a possibility to grow white abalone and economically incentivize it by a certain amount you can sell, and then the farm has to like release the rest, and that way it becomes its own self-sustaining thing. There's a lot of like laws that would have an issue with getting through that. But ultimately, eating more abalone is a good thing because it gets you used to what an abalone is, and you start to care a little bit more. Because, frankly, you say abalone to a lot of people, and they're like, what's happening? But it is one of those iconic things in California, and Monterey Abalone Company is right here, and they grow lovely abalone. And part of the reason that we could do the white abalone here at Moss Landing is because we also host Monterey Abalone Company and their hatchery and nursery. And so when we first started doing it, we borrowed their head hatchery guy to do the work for us. So it's a great example of science working with industry and restoration.
And also the Monterey Abalone Company is responsible for feeding my animals during lean months, which has been a lot more frequent in the last several years. So supporting them helps us feed our animals.
So how much money did you lose that you need to make up?
A year.
Yeah, we had about $1 million grant a year. We have been really fortunate in that we had a local family foundation in Sonoma County step up. And so part of what we're fundraising is a match ask from them. It's not a sustainable way to, on individual family foundation annual grants to run a program that will probably need to be run for several more decades. Well, it will need to be run for several more decades at least to save the species. But it is buying us the time we need to figure out what that looks like.
And have you approached the Packard Foundation?
Not yet.
Do you have a link to the?
They're not local, does it matter?
So state legislators are not receptive to this? You would think that.
The state is really investing a lot of support in the work.
Because it's very little money relative to the overall state budget. So you can save an entire species.
The state budget
It'd
is
be a big win.
they're already taking money and cutting things. The state ostensibly don't have any extra money at the moment. So asking the state for more than what they're doing at the moment, I think is a tall order.
Yeah. I will say that individuals working in the state are already overcommitting themselves without compensation for the work that they do for this species, and so there's a lot of support happening there. I want to be conscientious that we're already after 8:30, and I am committing the three of us on my team, who you see in Team White Abalone shirts, to hanging around and chatting for another 15-20 minutes. Thank you all so much for coming and spending this White Abalone evening with us. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing you all at tomorrow's awesome agenda.
All right, good morning, everybody. How are you guys doing today? Good. Who was here yesterday? Awesome. All right. Who learned something new about abalone? I did too. Well, I think it's going to be a great day today. I appreciate everybody coming here, and I'm really excited to hear from Linda as well, just about the tie of abalone, just from birth to death, and all of the life that it's tied to our resident Abalone community up here. This is really, it's a spiritual, it's artistic. There's so many different ties here, so I'm really excited to hear from Linda. But first, we're going to hear from Alyssa regarding the silent auction.
Hi everyone, if we didn't meet yesterday, my name is Alyssa Frederick. I'm the director of the White Abalone Captive Breeding Program.
So what we do is we're restoring one of the 2 endangered species of abalone. White abalone were the first marine invertebrate added to the Endangered Species Act. And when we started the program, there were about 2,000 animals in the wild, and we've added to that population by at least 17,000 by now. At the same time that we've reached this really big success, our federal funding has been eliminated as of this month. So we're running a silent auction to help raise money to keep this program going. And so we have some really cool stuff around the room. And all of the proceeds benefit the White Abalone Captive Breeding Program 100%. And all of the donations that come in through that will be doubled by a local foundation by the end of the year. So thank you so much for participating and for having our program here. I hope we get to chat soon. Thank you.
When does this happen?
The details. So after the talks this morning, there's going to be a break when people can go around and see what we have, bid on the auction items. After that break, we'll take everything down and figure out the winners, and then by lunchtime, we'll have everyone set up to take their items home. Thank you.
Thank you, Alyssa. Yes, can people be generous? Be generous with the money, because it's all going to a great cause, so we appreciate that.